You know, I've met many animals in my life, but never one like this little bobcat. He talks to the toaster when it pops, answers my phone when it rings, and somehow sings along whenever I play guitar. He's wild by nature, yet acts like he's been part of this home forever. And it makes me wonder, why does a wild bobcat behave like that? Maybe he's not just making noise. Maybe he's trying to speak in his own way. What do you think? And by the way, what time is it where you're watching from? Tell me in the comments, and if you enjoy these gentle stories, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next one. The storm arrived without warning. One moment, the forest outside Leo's cabin was quiet, just the whisper of wind through the pines. The next, the sky split open. Rain hammered the roof. Trees groaned in the wind. Lightning flashed, turning the windows into brief white mirrors. Leo stood by the window, watching the chaos. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He'd lived through louder storms, inside and out. Behind him, the old guitar leaned against the wall, strings dull, coated in dust. It hadn't been touched in months, maybe years. He'd told himself he liked the quiet, that silence meant peace. But lately, that silence had started to feel heavier than the storm. By morning, the rain had stopped. The world outside was a mess. Broken branches, puddles reflecting a pale, washed-out sky. Leo pulled on his boots and stepped outside, breathing in the sharp scent of wet earth and pine sap. He told himself he was just checking for damage, but maybe deep down, he wanted to hear something again. Anything. That's when he heard it. A faint sound beneath the wind, so soft he almost missed it. He froze. There it was again. A tiny cry, high and thin, carried through the trees. Not the sound of a bird. Not quite. It was too desperate, too alone. He followed it, pushing through dripping branches until he saw it. A fallen pine, split near the base. And there, tucked beneath the tangled roots, was a small, shivering shape. A bobcat kitten, no bigger than his hand. Its fur soaked through, eyes barely open. Leo crouched beside it, heart pounding. There was no sign of a mother, just that thin, trembling sound, barely more than a whisper. "Hey," he murmured, though his voice came out rough from disuse. The kitten tried to lift its head, failed, and went still again. Leo hesitated. Wild animals weren't meant to be touched. He knew that. But the air around them was cold and heavy, and the sight of that fragile life, so small, so breakable, hit something inside him he thought had long gone quiet. He shrugged off his jacket and wrapped the kitten carefully, tucking it close against his chest. It barely weighed anything, just warmth and heartbeat. Back at the cabin, he lined a cardboard box with an old sweater and set it near the fireplace. The kitten didn't move, only shivered once before curling into the fabric, a tiny ball of spotted fur. Leo sat beside it for a long time, listening to the fire crackle, the faint ticking of rain on the window. The storm outside had finally ended, but in that small sound, the faintest breath, the soft rise and fall of life, something new had begun. For the first time in years, the silence in Leo's cabin didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a promise. The days that followed were wrapped in quiet. The storm had passed, but the stillness it left behind clung to the cabin like fog. Even the fire seemed to burn softly, as if afraid to disturb the hush. The bobcat kitten barely made a sound. He slept most of the time, breathing in shallow little sighs, his tiny chest fluttering beneath the blanket. When he drank from the bottle, his movements were weak, uncertain. Leo would sit beside him, hand cupped around the small body, feeling the faint rhythm of its heartbeat against his palm. That sound, steady, fragile, became the metronome of his days. He'd forgotten what it was like to care for something alive. There was a strange comfort in the routine. Warming milk on the stove, checking the temperature, feeding drop by drop. Each tiny motion chipped away at the hard shell of silence he'd built around himself. At night, the cabin glowed dim with firelight. Shadows swayed across the walls, soft and slow. The kitten slept beside the hearth, wrapped in Leo's old sweater, its tiny paws twitching in dreams. Leo would sit nearby, guitar still untouched, listening to the faint crackle of wood and the even fainter breaths of his unexpected guest. And somewhere inside him, a memory stirred, the echo of old applause, the sound of strings vibrating under his fingers, a voice that once filled this same cabin with songs. But that voice had gone quiet long ago. Now, only the kitten's silence kept him company. In a strange way, it felt right. Two quiet souls keeping each other alive. Days slipped by. The kitten's eyes grew clearer, his movements stronger. He began to lift his head when Leo entered the room, blinking up at him with cautious curiosity. But still, no sound. Not a mewl, not a hiss. Just silence. One evening, Leo sat by the window, rain starting to fall again, soft and steady. He rested his chin in his hand, lost in thought. The cabin felt smaller than usual, the quiet pressing in on every wall. Then he heard it, a single, shaky chirp. So faint he almost thought he imagined it. He turned toward the fireplace. The kitten was sitting upright for the first time, tiny ears tilted forward, mouth still slightly open as if surprised by his own voice. Leo froze, a laugh catching in his throat. "Did you just—" Another chirp, then a third, stronger this time, almost a note. Leo smiled. It wasn't the smile of amusement, but of something loosening deep inside, like a string pulled too tight for too long. "Well," he murmured, voice low, steady. "Looks like the silence is over." He reached down and brushed a gentle finger over the kitten's head. "Echo," he said softly. The name hung in the air like a whisper, small but alive. The kitten blinked, tilted his head, and let out another sound, a faint trill answering the name as if he understood. Outside, the rain picked up, tapping against the window in an irregular rhythm. Inside, Leo leaned back, still smiling. The fire crackled. The kitten chirped again. And for the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty anymore. It had a pulse, a beat, a beginning. The silence that had once buried Leo was gone. In its place, a fragile new melody had started to play. The first note of something he didn't yet have words for. From the morning Echo found his voice, peace became a memory. The cabin that once felt like a monastery now pulsed with sound. Every sunrise began the same way. A sharp chirp near Leo's ear, followed by a flurry of paws across the floorboards. By the time he opened his eyes, the little bobcat was already halfway up the curtains, tail flicking like a banner of victory. "Echo," Leo groaned, voice half asleep. "It's 6 in the morning." Echo answered with a high trill, as if to say, "Exactly." "You're late!" He was impossible to ignore. If Leo tried to make coffee, Echo sat on the counter, chirping each time the machine hissed. If Leo turned on the faucet, Echo pawed at the running water, scattering droplets across the sink. Once, when Leo dropped a spoon, Echo pounced on it, dragging it triumphantly across the kitchen like stolen prey. By the second week, Leo's life had turned into a concert, an unpredictable mix of meows, chirps, clatters, and the occasional crash. The quiet that used to choke the cabin had been replaced by rhythm, chaos, and laughter. One afternoon, while Leo was repairing a loose string on his guitar, he decided to test something. He played a short tune through his old Bluetooth speaker, just a few notes from an unfinished song. The melody floated through the room, soft and wistful. Echo froze. His ears perked up, his golden eyes widened. Then, without warning, he opened his mouth and sang. It wasn't a meow. It wasn't a growl. It was a long, uneven howl that somehow managed to match the pitch of the song. He looked right at Leo while doing it, as if performing a duet. Leo laughed out loud. "No way!" The music played on. Echo continued, adjusting his tone, sometimes high and shrill, sometimes low and rumbling. It was terrible. It was perfect. When the music stopped, Echo sat down proudly, chest puffed, as if waiting for applause. Leo clapped once and Echo chirped back, a sound that could only mean, finally, someone recognizes talent. Later that night, as the cabin settled under the cool Oregon moon, Leo scrolled through old messages on his phone. One from his ex appeared at the top of the screen, the text tone still set to the faint ping she once liked. Before he could even react, Echo tilted his head and mimicked it. Perfectly. A single, crisp ping that echoed through the room. Leo blinked. Seriously? Echo did it again, louder this time, and then chirped twice as if laughing at his own joke. It became their new game. Every sound, every noise became a cue for Echo's imitation. Microwave beeps, door creaks, even the whistle of the kettle. The little bobcat absorbed them all, weaving them into his own strange music. At first, Leo tried to keep up. Then he just watched, amazed. Each sound felt like another layer added to a melody only they could hear. One evening, Leo sat at his desk, trying to write for the first time in years. Words came slowly, but in the background, Echo provided his own soundtrack. Chirps, trills, the occasional crash of something falling off a shelf. And somehow, it helped. The noise wasn't a distraction anymore. It was proof. Proof that silence no longer ruled his life. Proof that he wasn't alone. As night deepened, Leo leaned back and listened. Echo yowled softly from the other room, the tone strange and almost musical. A grin spread across Leo's face. "You're a one-cat orchestra," he whispered. And in that messy, noisy symphony of fur and sound, he realized something. Peace hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed its tune. It happened on a quiet morning, the kind that felt borrowed between storms. Sunlight spilled through the cabin windows, cutting across the wooden floor in long golden stripes. Echo was unusually calm, padding along behind Leo as he carried laundry down the hall. Then the bobcat froze. He'd spotted something. Himself. In the tall mirror leaning against the wall, another bobcat stared back. Same amber eyes, same tufted ears, same wild spotted coat. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Echo arched his back, fur bristling, tail puffed out like a brush. A low growl vibrated from his chest. He lunged, smacking the glass with both paws. The other cat lunged too, mirroring every motion perfectly. Leo dropped the laundry basket, biting back a laugh. "Easy, champ, that's you." But Echo didn't believe him. He circled the mirror, peering behind it, confused by the vanishing stranger. Then he returned to the front, chirping sharply, demanding the imposter explain himself. When the reflection chirped back, Echo's ears twitched in disbelief. The standoff went on until Leo finally lifted him away. The bobcat squirmed, indignant, still growling under his breath. "Relax," Leo said softly, stroking between his ears. "You're not fighting anyone. You just met yourself." The words hung in the air longer than he meant them to. Because as he looked into the mirror, Leo saw his own reflection too. Tired eyes, unshaven face, a man who hadn't played music in years because he couldn't stand to face the version of himself that had failed. Echo's fury faded to a low hum, his eyes still locked on the mirror. And suddenly, Leo understood. The little wild thing wasn't angry. He was scared of the stranger staring back at him, just like Leo had been. He set Echo down gently. The bobcat approached the mirror again, slower this time. He chirped once softly. The reflection did the same. He tilted his head. The reflection did too. Then, almost shyly, he pressed his nose against the glass. Leo smiled, a quiet, broken sort of smile. "Guess we're not so different, huh?" Echo blinked at him through the mirror, tail flicking once, then twice. The tension in the room lifted like mist burned away by morning light. Leo picked up the fallen laundry and exhaled. The cabin felt lighter somehow, less haunted. Echo had faced his reflection and moved on. Maybe it was time Leo did the same. And for the first time in years, he looked in the mirror without flinching. By the end of the month, Echo had grown stronger, faster, louder, bolder. Too bold, maybe. He'd sprint across the cabin at dawn, leap onto shelves, knock down mugs, and then sit proudly beside the mess, trilling as if announcing his achievements. But sometimes, he'd pace restlessly for hours, yowling at invisible shadows. Concern tugged at Leo. Maybe something was wrong. Maybe wild animals weren't meant to live inside four walls. So one crisp morning, he loaded Echo into a carrier and drove to the nearest town. The small veterinary clinic smelled of cedar and coffee, its waiting room filled with the chatter of other pets. Echo, unimpressed, yowled so loudly that every head turned. A woman holding a golden retriever laughed. "He's got opinions, doesn't he?" Leo gave a weary grin. "He's expressive." When it was their turn, Dr. Anya Sharma, a calm woman with silver-streaked hair, greeted them warmly. "So, this is the famous troublemaker?" "He's been restless," Leo said, setting the carrier on the table. "And loud, constantly." Dr. Sharma opened the door carefully. Echo stepped out with cautious dignity, sniffed the air, then chirped sharply as if announcing his arrival. The exam was quick, eyes clear, heart strong, teeth sharp. Through it all, Echo grumbled and chirped, never once falling silent. Finally, the vet smiled. "He's perfectly healthy." Leo frowned. "Then why?" She interrupted gently. "Leo, in the wild, silence means survival. Animals stay quiet because noise gives them away. But here," she looked at Echo, who was now sitting proudly on the table, tail twitching. "He's loud because he feels safe. He's not demanding attention. He's declaring trust." Leo blinked. "Trust?" Dr. Sharma nodded. "He's telling you, I'm not afraid anymore." The words hit deeper than Leo expected. He glanced at Echo, this wild, stubborn creature who had turned his home upside down, and felt something twist in his chest. All those sleepless mornings, the trills, the chaos, they weren't noise. They were proof of life, proof of love. "He's communicating," the vet added softly. "You gave him a reason to speak." On the drive home, the forest rolled by in streaks of gold and green. Echo chirped from the passenger seat, his voice soft, rhythmic, like he was narrating the passing world. Leo didn't shush him this time. He just smiled and said quietly, "Yeah, buddy, I hear you." And for the first time, he realized that silence had never been peace. It had just been loneliness, waiting to be broken. A week later, Leo's oldest friend, Mark, showed up unannounced. He hadn't been to the cabin in years. The last time he was here, Leo was still performing, still chasing stages and crowds. Now he looked around the cluttered little space, the scattered toys, the shredded curtain, and raised an eyebrow. "So this is what retirement looks like?" he said, half teasing. Before Leo could answer, a spotted blur leapt onto the couch. Echo stared at the stranger, ears tilted, tail flicking in suspicion. Then he chirped, a quick, sharp sound that made Mark jump. "What the hell is that thing?" "His name's Echo," Leo said. "And he lives here." Mark laughed nervously. "You're kidding, right? A bobcat? You can't keep that. It's wild." Leo shrugged, scratching Echo's chin. "He doesn't seem to think so." Mark's smile faded. "You need peace, man. Space to breathe. You used to write songs here, remember? This—" He gestured to the shredded sofa, the claw marks on the wall. "This chaos isn't you." Leo leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Maybe it is now." Mark sighed. "You've been through enough, Leo. Don't tie yourself to another mess. Let the rescue center take him. Get your quiet back." The words hung in the air. Get your quiet back. That used to sound like healing. Now it sounded like a cage. Echo chirped again, padding closer to Leo. He brushed his head against Leo's leg, a small, instinctive gesture of trust. Leo looked down at him and felt something steady, something true. "The quiet I wanted," he said slowly, "almost killed me." Mark frowned. "Come on." "No," Leo said, his voice firm. "When everything went silent, after the band, after she left, I thought peace would save me. But all it did was make the walls louder. This noise, his voice, it's not chaos, Mark. It's life." For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was Echo's soft purr, a low hum that filled the space between them. Mark looked at his friend, really looked at him, and saw something different. Not the broken man he'd once pitied, but someone alive again, anchored by something wild and unpredictable. He shook his head, half smiling. "You always did need a little noise to keep you sane." Leo chuckled, reaching down to scratch Echo's ear. "Guess I finally found the right kind." Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the pines. Inside, Echo chirped again, a bright, sure sound that filled the room like music. And Leo realized he didn't need peace to write again. He just needed love loud enough to wake him up. That night, after Mark's truck disappeared down the dirt road, silence drifted back into the cabin. Different this time. Not heavy, just waiting. Leo sat by the window, the last light of dusk bleeding through the trees. The air smelled of pine and ash. On the far side of the room, the old guitar leaned against the wall, half hidden in shadow. He hadn't touched it in years. Once it had been his life, his voice. But when everything fell apart, when the music stopped meaning anything, he'd sealed it away like a wound. Echo padded across the floor, tail brushing against Leo's leg. He chirped softly, then looked toward the guitar as if pointing it out. Leo followed his gaze. "That old thing?" he said under his breath. "Don't tell me you want to sing again." Echo blinked, then climbed onto the couch, curling up but keeping his eyes on the instrument. His quiet insistence felt like a challenge. Leo stood, crossed the room, and picked up the guitar. Dust lifted in a small cloud. The wood felt dry and cool beneath his fingers. He sat down slowly, tightening each string until the faint, familiar tension hummed through the air. The first strum was rough, unsteady, flat. But then came another, and another. The melody was old, one he'd written years ago in a hotel room after a show that ended in silence. He'd never finished it. It felt too raw back then, too honest. Now, in the half-light of his cabin, the notes came back like ghosts, hesitant, trembling, but true. Echo lifted his head, listening. His ears twitched at every change in pitch. When Leo stumbled, the bobcat chirped once, almost like a cue to keep going. Leo smiled faintly. "Bossy little critic, aren't you?" The music deepened, finding its rhythm. The chords felt unfamiliar and familiar all at once, like reopening an old wound only to find it had healed in secret. He played until his fingers ached. The song wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in years, it didn't sound empty. It sounded alive. When he stopped, the room was quiet again. Echo yawned and settled against his leg, purring softly. Leo looked down at him and whispered, "Guess you found the music I lost." Outside, the forest hummed with night sounds, crickets, wind, the distant call of an owl. Inside, the last note of his unfinished song still lingered in the air. It wasn't complete. Not yet. But for the first time, Leo wanted to finish it. Not for the world. For the small, wild soul who had brought his silence back to life. The next evening, the forest was drenched in gold. Sunlight filtered through the pines, soft and trembling, painting the cabin in quiet warmth. Leo sat on the edge of his old couch, guitar balanced on his knee, fingers resting on the strings. For a moment, he just listened to the hum of wind, the faint creak of wood, the rhythm of his own breathing. Echo slept nearby, sprawled on the rug, paws twitching in dream. Leo began to play. The same melody from the night before, fragile, unfinished. The chords moved slowly, almost shyly, like testing the air after years of silence. But this time something felt different. Each note carried weight, truth, something raw that had been buried too long. Halfway through the song, Echo stirred. His ears flicked. He lifted his head, blinking sleep away, then sat up, listening. The sound drew him closer. He padded toward Leo, paws silent against the wood. When Leo struck the next chord, Echo opened his mouth and answered. A low, wavering sound, half chirp, half song. Leo froze mid-strum. The note he played hung between them, trembling. Echo tilted his head, eyes glowing in the amber light, and vocalized again, longer this time, matching the rise and fall of the guitar. Leo laughed softly. "You're joining in, huh?" He played another line, and Echo responded in rhythm, his trills rising like harmonies between the strings. It was wild, uneven, impossible, and yet somehow perfect. The song took on a new shape. Man and Bobcat. Two voices, one instinct. Each sound answered the other, weaving something that didn't belong to either alone. Leo played harder, letting the melody spill freely, raw and unpolished. Echo followed every change, every pause. At one point, the bobcat let out a high, wavering cry that stretched across the final chord, a sound so pure it made Leo's throat tighten. He kept playing, even when his hands began to shake. The tears came without warning, hot, unstoppable. Not sadness, not joy, just release. The music swelled, filled the cabin, spilled into the fading light. It was messy and untrained and alive. It was everything Leo had been afraid to feel. When the final note faded, silence fell. Not empty, but full. Echo climbed onto Leo's lap, pressing his head against the guitar's body, still humming with vibration. Leo stroked his fur, whispering, "You gave my song back to me." Echo purred, a deep, steady rhythm against Leo's chest. Outside, the forest breathed in harmony. The rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind, the faint echo of a melody finally whole. Inside, two hearts beat in sync, one human, one wild, both healed by the same song. The next morning, the cabin felt lighter, as if the night's song had swept the dust from the air. Leo brewed coffee while Echo sprawled on the windowsill, basking in the first sunlight. The guitar still rested nearby, strings faintly humming from the night before, as if the music hadn't fully left. On impulse, Leo set his phone on the table, angled the camera toward the couch, and picked up the guitar again. "Let's show the world what you've been up to," he said, half to himself, half to the curious little face watching him. He strummed the first chord. Echo perked up, ears sharp, eyes bright. By the second chord, he was singing, his signature mix of chirps and trills, loud and proud. Leo laughed but kept playing. The duet grew into something beautiful and chaotic. Raw notes, wild timing, perfect honesty. When the song ended, Leo played the video back. Echo leaned toward the screen, staring at his own moving reflection, then chirped at it like he was giving feedback. Leo nearly dropped the phone laughing. That night, he posted it online with a simple caption, "I was lost in silence until an echo found me." He didn't expect much. Maybe a few friends would smile. Maybe someone would comment about how strange and cute a talking bobcat was. By morning, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 10,000 views, then 50, then 100,000. The video spread like wildfire, across platforms, across countries. Comments poured in, each one a small heartbeat from somewhere far away. This made my day. He's not just singing, he's talking to you. My cat does this too when I play piano. I cried. This is love in sound. Leo scrolled through them, stunned. He'd thought the world had forgotten how to listen. But here they were, thousands of strangers hearing what he had almost missed. Connection, trust, life in all its messy music. That evening, he opened an email from a music producer he hadn't spoken to in years. No contract, no offers, just gratitude, it read. The truest music doesn't come from a studio, it comes from the heart. Thank you for reminding me. Leo stared at the screen for a long time. The words blurred as he smiled, a quiet, trembling kind of smile that reached somewhere deep inside. He looked over at Echo, who was rolling on the rug, batting at the guitar pick. You did this, you know. Echo chirped once, proud as ever. Fame didn't matter anymore. Applause didn't matter. What mattered was this: the noise that had once annoyed him, the voice that had refused to be quiet. Because somewhere between the strings and the wild song, Leo had found something louder than music. He had found truth. Seasons shifted quietly over the Oregon woods. The wild storms of winter faded into soft, green mornings. Leo's cabin, once a fortress of silence, now pulsed with life. He didn't chase tours or stages anymore. The fame that once defined him had turned into something small, almost tender. A handful of stories, a viral video, a few messages from strangers who said his music made them feel less alone. That was enough. Every morning began the same way. A chirp, then another. Then the familiar thud of paws against his chest as Echo announced the start of the day. Leo would groan, half laughing. 5 more minutes. But Echo never negotiated. He'd nip at Leo's hair until the man gave up, grinning despite himself. Breakfasts were noisy, always. Echo perched on the counter, trilling impatiently while Leo sliced meat or poured coffee. The smell of wood smoke, the clatter of pans, the endless chatter of a bobcat who had no volume control. It was chaos. Beautiful chaos. When the mornings quieted, Leo wrote songs about trust, about wildness, about second chances. They weren't polished or perfect, but they carried something honest, a sound of living. And always, Echo was near, sometimes sprawled under the table, sometimes pressing his head against the guitar's body as if feeling the music through his fur. He'd hum in low, rolling trills that blended with the notes until Leo couldn't tell where one sound ended and the other began. In the evenings, they sat on the porch together. The sky turned gold, then purple, then deep, soft blue. Leo played while the forest whispered around them. Wind through pine needles, distant owls, the steady rhythm of life. Echo curled in his lap, purring so hard it almost shook the strings. Leo smiled to himself, a quiet peace settling in his chest. The world had once told him silence was serenity. That quiet meant healing. But he knew better now. Peace wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of the right ones. The laughter, the chirps, the music. The heartbeat of something wild that refused to stay silent. He strummed a final chord, and Echo lifted his head, chirping once as if answering. The two sounds merged, guitar and voice, man and wild, harmony and heart. The cabin glowed in the last light of day. The world outside faded into night. And inside that small wooden house, filled with echoes and warmth, Leo finally understood. Home was never supposed to be quiet. It was supposed to sing.